towards an alternative notion of the interface. Abstract. The aim of this paper is to propose an alternative notion of the interface. While the existing notions of the interface suffice, there is a need for understanding the interface as an ecology rather than as object or technology. Scholars such as Branden Hookway, Galloway, Nanna Verhoeff, and Heidi Rae Cooley understand the interface as a relationship, processes, doing, and habits, respectively. However, in consideration of the new and emerging social processes and transformations engendered by interfaces as platforms by which we understand and relate with the world in more specific ways, I argue that the notion of the interface as an ecology would enrich the discussion and provide an ecological boundary object for thinking across disciplines. I examine the interface through etymological, epistemological, psychoanalytic, and artistic standpoints, as well as exploring the terms affective, material, and infrastructural dimensions. I conclude that ecological notion of the interface will produce a more nuanced and performative understanding of the term, and shift our focus away from the material form of interfaces to the actions, intensities, and aesthetics of the interface. Ecology is critical to how we understand interfaces, as it deals with the relationship between organisms and their environments, including the relationship between artists and the expressive media installations, and between users and their interface platforms. The ecological notion of the interface refers to how we live in the networked, hypermediated space, relate with our technologies, and engage in artistic practices at all forms of interfaces. Introduction. The Oxford English Dictionary defines an interface as a surface lying between two portions of matter or space and forming their common boundary. It also defines the interface as a means of or place of interaction between two systems, organizations, etc. These definitions, which seemingly derive from the overprivileged status of the material form in Western epistemology, shape how the term has been used in scholarship. In his book, Interface 2014, Branden Hookway describes the interface as a relationship. But to Galloway, Nanna Verhoeff, and Heidi Rae Cooley, interfaces are processes, doing, and habits, respectively. In a slight contrast, Alexander Galloway 2017 takes a more historically nuanced view of the term and understands interfaces as effects or processes. Whether the focus is on the interface itself, as with Galloway, or on the relationship of things and entities, as with Hookway, both notions of the interface lean towards objects. The online etymological dictionary traces the root of the word interface to Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit origins. In Latin, the prefix inter stands for among or between. In Sanskrit, inter stands for antar, meaning among, between. Likewise, the prefix inter correlates with the Greek word entera, which translates to intestines. The suffix face is derived from the Latin facie, meaning appearance, form, or figure. The suffix face also means to make. Within the Greek root, interface refers to a place of dwelling or a home. According to the Practical Sanskrit English Dictionary, antar can be used as a preposition to mean in the middle, between, in, into, and inside. The phrase in the middle apparently explains the Greek translation of inter or antar to intestines, denoting the location of animals' bowels in the middle of their bodies. In the middle also indicates a temporary or permanent position of a thing in a place and suggests the existence of other things surrounding it. The coexistence of one thing or organism amongst other things or organisms occurs within what Beck's calls duration, meaning the time in which things happen, and produces a relationship that sustains organisms in their environment. Ecology is about the interface or the place of dwelling because it is the relationship of organisms with other organisms in their dwellings, in the middle of, in, and inside their environments. The classical Hegelian definition of ecology reads, the whole science of the relations of the organisms to the environment, including, in the broad sense, all the conditions of existence. Stauffer, 1957, page 140. I adopt this definition of ecology because of its insistence in accommodating the living and the non-living things that weren't thought of as constituting ecology before the late 19th century. Ecology affirms that living organisms have relationships with the environment. Thus, interfaces as ecologies of practice verify the relationship of artists with their expressive technologies and the mediated space in which they live and express their creative intents. The ecological notion of the interface creates a mental space for thinking about our expressive technologies as sites of practice on which our repeated haptics cultivate layers of actions and intensities. Marshall McLuhan informed that the content should not be separated from the form. Norman Long's definition of the interface as a site of social friction where social discontinuities based upon discrepancies in values, interest, knowledge, and power are most likely to be located, describes an ecology of action that better situates the interface within ecological praxis. Such an ecological notion of the interface enriches our understanding of the interface and engenders a conceptual shift away from the dominant notions of the interface that are moored to the material paradigm. Ecology enables us to see and think through the micro life forms, bacterial lives, that live, mutate, hibernate, and atrophy in all ecologies. The question of the interface. Why does an alternative notion of the interface matter? My answer is that interfaces have implications for effect, materiality, infrastructure, access, literacy, and ecology. Interfaces are products of cultural, technological, economic, and political dynamics. They therefore have far-reaching effects. Although studies from 20 to 30 years ago, such as those by Csikszentmihalyi and Robson 1990 and Simon 2010, said that there was a lack of research on the mediation of aesthetic experience, we now have much hindsight to move further from those positions. Lev Manovich informs us that interfaces mediate the aesthetic experience of cultural objects, and John Dewey decried the failure of cultural institutions to mediate aesthetic experiences in artistic context. In his The Medium is the Message 1967, Marshall McLuhan showed that the form and method by which information is communicated impact the message significantly in terms of the meaning the message assumes under its current medium and how it is perceived when delivered by that medium. Unlike the effect of interfaces, the materiality of interfaces, that is what interfaces are made of, their forms and shapes and tactile appeal, makes makes visceral impression on us and alters our perception of an interface's aesthetic or content. The mobile screen interface of our handheld devices is a precious, sensitive touch screen that also serves as a point also serves as an input interface. It takes the name mobile screen because it is fitted on small handheld devices such as smartphones, iPads, and laptop computers, which can easily be carried about. The materiality of interfaces, particularly mobile screen interfaces, can be discussed epistemologically, haptically, and psychoanalytically. Epistemologically, there is an over-reliance of the material form in Western thought. This over-reliance created a representational system where history locates in the material form, and the material form then becomes intrinsic to history. Rather than being a framing device to history, the material form becomes both the history and the proof of that history. Our haptic relationships with the mobile screen interface mostly occur through what Verhoeff and Cooley called touch, swipe, and pinch. Research in machine learning shows that the future of haptics is at the intersection of interfaces and orality. Soon, touches, swipes, and pinches will be completely overtaken by speech inputs that are more oral and effective than even Siri, Amazon Echo, Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Google Home, etc. Even then, we will continue to reach for the things that appeal to our sense of beauty, such as the shiny smartphone or iPads that reflect images. Lanzosi's article in the opinion section of the New York Times, February 15, 2013, states that brain scan studies reveal that the sight of an attractive product can trigger the part of the motor cerebrum that governs hand movement. Instinctively, we reach out for attractive things. Beauty literally moves us. The psychology of humans and why we crave attractive things is not important to this essay, but it is noteworthy that human proclivity for touching and acquiring beautiful things have been examined by scholars. In the museum and galleries, for instance, we have the urge and the tendency to touch beautiful or appealing works of art. In the article on touching, The Inhuman That Therefore I Am, 2012, Karen Barrett states that we touch to reveal the self within the other and to reveal the other within the self. The mobile devices are handy, smooth, and appealing to the senses of touch. As such, they are ontologically relatable. We love to possess and hold them, and in the contemporary mediated space, we are obsessed with them partly because of the Western materialism that has become globally hegemonic. It doesn't matter what part of the globe one is in. The perception of and relationship with media devices are predictably the same, but we are also attached to these devices in some psychoanalytic ways. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan showed that by the age of 18 months, children would have acquired the ability to identify themselves in a mirror. Lacan posits that because humans biologically feel a sense of helplessness or Hilflosigkeit during the early stages of their development, they relied on other people for life and nourishment. This complete reliance on others for their survival results in a child developing a sense of anxiety, distress, and frustration in the immediate and later life. In essence, looking in the mirror and seeing his or her image reassures the child that she or he will overcome the stage of helplessness. Thus, people spend the rest of their lives chasing after this unattainable state of harmony and self-assurance falsely promised by the mirror. Through lifelong habits of looking in the mirror, taking selfies, and looking at every surface that could reflect them and provide that brief moment of assurance. In the age of ubiquitous screens, mobile screens as handheld devices and urban screens in a highly mediated public space, we are drowning in the sea of screens. Lacan's psychoanalytic theory of the mirror stage sums up our proclivity for the mirror, which in the present time can be a camera, the surfaces of our mobile devices, or any reflective surface. But we are also attracted to reflective surfaces because we subliminally recognize them as ecologies of happenings. We look at reflective surfaces not only to see ourselves in the self-assurance ritual of Lacan, but also as a recognition of the reflective surface as ecologies of aesthetic experiences in which we are both principal performers and the spectacle. We often characterize them as more personal or private interfaces owing to their location in the interiors of our bodies and clothing, but the facticity of their presence in the imbricating mediated urban and private spaces means that our mobile devices have become more urban than bucolic, more exterior than interior, and more public than private interfaces. Thus, as far as interface agenda go, mobile devices are only the miniaturized versions of the larger situated urban interfaces in the imbricated private and public spaces. Contemporary interfaces are intertwined with complex political and historical formations at both local and global levels. Highlighting these complexities shows that the interfaces are not static fields in which things exist, but are ecologies with participatory outcomes. Interfaces are sites of actions that create histories, shape politics, and define conflicts. New media are largely defined by the dominant forces of the modern capitalist society. Althusser, Baudrillard, Debord, Agamben, and Stigler have critiqued media technologies along specific socio-political and historical fault lines. While The Language of the New Media 2001 does not align with those trajectories, Lev Manovich had held a deep suspicion of ideological politics. In his earlier Soviet writing on totalitarian interactivity, 1996, Manovich revealed that digital interactivity was a kind of political manipulation, and that the internet was a new panopticon where everybody could track everybody. The ecological notion of the interface can be valuable for understanding democracy as a network of actions and actors that include interface designers, citizens, users, political institutions, and the mediated urban space as a site of conflict. Democracy epitomizes the complex political and historical formations in which contemporary interfaces are intertwined, but it does not matter what historical and political imperatives that are embedded in the interface infrastructure. The interface must be accessible to a literate democratic citizenry. The democratization of the internet came with the installation of communication towers in public spaces and crisscrossing of subterranean stretches with fiber optic cables. The internet was also touted as a democratizing weapon that will ultimately sweep aside authoritarian regimes. The ubiquity of mobile devices and more efficient user interfaces created an impression of access, but while the internet expanded and strengthened the democratic space in some space, it created a new panopticon occasioned by a new and increased form of governance. Ironically, autocratically and anti-people politics grew even stronger on the pedestals of new interface platforms, and new technosocial and political ecologies of the digitally marginalized sprouted from the Sahara to the Western hemispheres. Gradually, it began to dawn on even the most ardent proponents of techno-utopia that even on the new digital infrastructure networks, billions of people and swathes of geographies were being left behind and abandoned on the sidewalks of the touted digital superhighways. The victims were those without access to the internet and its attendant technologies, and those without the knowledge to navigate the difficult terrains of the new digital sidewalk, let alone the digital superhighways. In the highly literate West, where access to digital technologies is supposedly thorough, institutional irony whereby many citizens were left without internet access and interface platforms developed. In many societies, mobile digital devices such as the smartphone and iPad are still ostentatious commodities, and access to them or the internet is still encumbered by socio-economic and political bottlenecks. In the years since digital democratization, the gap in interface access and literacy has created an asymmetrical socio-political and economic imbalance. This imbalance has been consistently passed off as digital device, a misnomer that only aligns the problem with the traditional dualities of North versus South, developed versus developing nations, digital native versus digital immigrant, white versus black, and rich versus poor. But it is none of these dualities. It is the dark ecology. Dark ecologies are the difficult ecologies that arose in the time of interface democratization due to the embedded inequalities in access to interface platforms. Contemporary interfaces come laden with inequalities in access and literacy, owing to the inequality in access to interface platforms and lack of the education needed to use those platforms. Obviously, in the dark ecologies, the disturbing characteristics of the digital divide subsist. For example, in Dallas, Texas, a city in the affluent, highly literate and digitally connected United States, many families and people are without internet and interface access. Dark ecologies can be characterized by the many forms of contemporary needs, such as homelessness, destitution, and lack of other essentials that are often not associated with the problems of the interface. Housing is an interface. Homes are ecologies through and by which citizens access aspects of citizenship rights, such as voting in elections. There is a need for universal access to interface infrastructure to enable citizens to interface better with life. I use homelessness and destitution to characterize the dark ecology because in the age of digital ubiquity, homelessness and destitution are tied to the larger constellations of politics, agency, and access. McLuhan shows that interfaces are spaces of interactions. Thus, interfaces highlight the condition of the homeless in our network-mediated spaces. The space of homelessness is also the space of communication, aesthetics, interaction between the homeless and the homed, and the society, and amongst the homeless themselves. The space of homelessness is the space of becoming embodied politics. Taking an extended somotechnic view of destitution in the mediated public space, I observe a systematic shaping of bodies through a consideration of various forms of technologies, power, and body politics. Foucault argue that power first constructs desirable bodies, then proceeds to subdue them to all sorts of control mechanisms. For Foucault, the cultural construction of the body can be understood through the model of inscriptions that I believe includes the reciprocity of the soma and the technique. Incidentally, the term soma techniques was invented during a discussion of the body modification, Changing Bodies, Changing Selves conference held at Macquarie University, Australia in November 2002. The soma technique reading of homeless bodies at the interface or in the interface, where the mediated public space is understood as an interface, helps our understanding of the spatial interface as a dark ecology. In conclusion, an alternative notion of the interface which recognizes the term's ecological attributes is embedded in the term's root in Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit languages where it had ecological leaning. The need to reposition the notion of the interface along those roots has become crucial at this time of ubiquitous interfaces and a more productive notion than its fixity in the material object. The notion of the interface as an ecology opens new ecological spaces for effect, materiality, infrastructure access, and literacy. When we focus on the materiality of the interface as opposed to its performativity, we lose sight of the term's cognitive flows and intensities that accrue daily due to our actions and rituals at all forms of interfaces. Affective experiences at the interface inflect our understanding of the interface by what the interface does and how those dates inform our reactions in profound ways. As links to unnatural appurtenances of infrastructures, interfaces are useless when they cannot be accessed or used due to lack of or poor interface literacy. The relationship between the interface and infrastructure shapes our lives and lives' decisions, how we live and behave in the mediated private and public spaces, organize as actant citizens, engage in other democratic imperatives, and engage with emergent aesthetic possibilities that require interface platforms. Interfaces define our contemporary existence and understanding, Interfaces define our contemporary existence and understanding it as ecologies makes sense.